The world has been reeling under natural calamities for years now. Activists have been calling attention to the climate crisis. But in a first, 6 young adults have taken 32 European governments to court over their alleged failure to act on climate change. The petitioners aged between 11 and 24 years old. Here are all 6 of them, as you can see on your screens. They hail from Portugal. The group filed the case in September 2020 after Portugal was ravaged by wildfires and heat waves in 2017. 4 of the applicants are from the central Portuguese region of Leiria, where 2 wildfires killed more than 100 people. The group claims to have collected evidence for their case over the last 6 years.
So I will say it's time to act. The people need you. You are the voice of the world. So if you want to take action and show you that you are capable to change the planet and for the generation that is good, you have to act and respect and listen to our voices.
The litigants argue that inaction to tackle global warming and other aspects of climate change threaten their rights. These include not limited to physical and mental well-being. The case, which is being heard at the European Court of Human Rights, has been filed on grounds of infringement of the right to life and respect for private life, Articles 2 and 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights.
Today's case is about the young. It is about the price that they are paying for the failure of states to tackle the climate emergency. It is about the harm that they will suffer during their lifetimes unless states step up to their responsibilities.
This climate change-related environmental degradation has a devastating impact on the enjoyment of human rights for all of us, but in particular on children and young people, such as the applicants in this case. It affects their physical and mental health, their civil, political and social rights, as well as their dignity. It is therefore crucial to adopt a child rights-based approach to the question of climate change and how it affects their human rights.
The hearing today could be an opportunity to deliver a legally binding decision that would require governments to act, because they have failed to act despite having the resources to adopt more ambitious climate policies.
However, the case is yet to be admitted for trial by the Grand Chamber, since the group went directly to the ECHR without first seeking recourse in domestic courts. It could take several months for the court to decide whether it can hear the case or not.
We've been working with the
All right, for more on this, we are joined by Dr. Benjamin Pohl, who is the head of Climate Diplomacy and Security Program at a Berlin-based think tank, Adelphi. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Thanks for having me.
Right. Dr. Benjamin, let's start right off with this. What are the key arguments which are being presented by the 6 Portuguese youths? And one of them is as young as 11 years old. What are the key arguments in their case, and how significant is the court case in holding nations accountable for their response to global warming?
Yeah, I mean, the key argument is that they are being personally affected. Their future is very seriously being affected, and essentially, their rights are being infringed upon by the actions, or rather the inactions of current governments who are not doing enough to stop the climate crisis, and hence exposing them already now. But they make the claim about the wildfires that are personally affecting them, but of course even more so in the future with the consequences of the climate crisis. And as the science shows, these consequences are going to be more dire in the future, as we will see more and more intense extreme weather events, and of course many other impacts that are playing out.
Right. Doctor, and I couldn't help but notice this, the age groups of these 6 contenders were taking all the European nations and their governments to court 6 of them, aged 11 to 24. What has driven them to take this kind of a step? Is it are they as aware about climate change, or are there more minds behind them? Or what has propelled them to take this kind of a move on the global stage?
I think, there has been a growing awareness, of course, across society, but particularly among younger people. So we've had the Fridays for Future movement, inspired by Greta Thunberg from Sweden, and I think the sense that is very clearly there is that there is they wouldn't call it like this, but there's an incentive mismatch between those holding political power, which have a time horizon over the next few years, and their own lives, which are only about to really get started. And because the consequences of today's actions and inactions are going to be borne by them, I think that can give a very strong sense of grievance.
Dr. Benjamin, what challenges do all 6 of them face in their pursuit of climate action at the European Court of Human Rights if this goes ahead in that court?
Yeah, I think as in many of similar court cases, and there have been a range and ongoing on the effects of climate change, I think the key problem is showing that why I, as the claimant, am personally and directly affected. Showing that I'm personally affected is not that hard, but then establishing the causal link between an actor such as the government, which produces laws and regulations, which then lead society to adopt certain habits, which then contribute to climate change, which then has some impacts that somehow come down to me personally. Of course, is quite difficult, and it's also difficult to show, as you normally must, that I'm as a claimant, I'm particularly affected. So I'm not just one of 8 billion people on the globe, and all of us are affected, but I am personally, very specifically, more affected. So, which is then the reason for me to take that case to the court, and that's of course hard to do. And I think up until about 5 years ago, there were no precedents for this, but now there have been a number of cases where courts have, started to recognize that link, and so I think there is a good chance that in these cases, actually, the court will find that the claimants have a case to make.
Dr. Paul, now it's a little premature to be discussing this, but just for the sake of looking forward, what potential outcomes or implications could this court case have on international climate action efforts, and how does this court case align with the global movement for climate justice, which of course these 6 youngsters are heralding at the moment?
Yeah, I think in general, as I said, it's part of a wave of court cases, and the main impact would of course be to not necessarily that specific legal rules are adapted as a direct outcome, but that the political pressure on governments is raised to increase their ambition on climate policy. So if and there's a number of ifs, the European Court of Human Rights were to find that they have a case, they couldn't, of course, directly order remediate actions, and even courts in domestic contexts normally wouldn't. But they would normally give some guidelines as to how this could potentially be addressed, and that then is, a point of political pressure on parliaments and governments, to raise the ambition. And we've had some of such cases in Germany, and in the Netherlands, and also in other countries, and it has resulted then in action. Whether that action is adequate is another question, and probably the claimants would say, no, it's not sufficient yet. That's why we are suing yet again for going against our human rights. But it does lead to something. Governments usually do not want to be seen to be ignoring such rulings.
And I don't think they'll be able to ignore it either. It's going to be one of those classical cases of 6 youngsters aged 11 to 24 taking on some of the world's biggest economies for the sake of the climate. That is something is going to definitely set a trend, and it's going to be one for the ages. Thank you so much for your inputs. That was Dr. Benjamin Paul joining us from Berlin.
Thanks again for having me.